Hello, Retro Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Tankard Lexicon, and welcome to this new appendix episode of the Steampunk Beginners Guide. Where to start with steampunk? It is a question I get a lot from my viewers who are new to the community, and for good reason. Overall, we do quite a terrible job at talking about steampunk, especially when it comes to its sources of inspiration. I talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating. To kill any public online conversation on the aesthetics of a certain object or image, just mention something is whatever punk you happen to project on it. It is bound to be the last comment in that thread. Why? Because we intuitively know this is projection. Therefore, going against it can be taken as a personal slight. And that is the consequence of a community refusing to commit to a definition of its own adopted name. Therefore, labeling anything steampunk is meaningless to begin with. Seriously, how is anyone to know what you mean when you say, "This is steampunk"? Now, it might mean something when I mention it to my loyal viewers, because we do have a set of definitions we use here, and motivated why we use those definitions. Does anyone beyond our broadcast use these meanings? I may not have seen evidence of this, but if you have, please let us know. That is why I am so annoyed of all these whatever punks, because what do all these things mean? Clockwork Beast in the past, and I feel I'm already repeating myself as it is. I poked fun of it, prodded it during other videos like our Atom Punk rant, or a two-parter on Fallout on Steampunk, but I needed to give it its own separate video. Let me rephrase that question. What inspires steampunk? Only when we agree on what the origins of steampunk are, can we really move this conversation into the future. However, progress is not linear, and why the name exists and what it became to mean are very far apart. For those who don't know, because you have not watched our Steampunk Beginners Guide, hint hint, the term was made up by K.W. Jeter to describe a collection of stories that emerged from the cyberpunk community. These were basically science fiction stories set in a Victorian setting because that was the period of early science fiction these new tales drew their inspiration from. Jeter then described these as steampunks, more as a joke and a wordplay on cyberpunk, like cyberpunk but with steam engines, or cyberpunk in the past. The initial take could also be seen as the science fiction approach to alternate history. We have to wonder if he would have made up that name if he had realized how influential proto-science fiction would become. I say proto-science fiction because the writers and creators of the early 2000s, who were influenced by the same stories and movies, would be called steampunks, whether they were aware of its existence or not. If you enjoy Jules Verne, H.G. Wells or Lovecraft, and you're looking for a community, you'll likely find the steampunk community. A very unique movement within the general sphere of geekery that combines proto-science fiction with pop culture and fantasy. But what is steampunk now? This is a complicated question with no consensus on the issue. Jeter made the name up tongue-in-cheek. Unfortunately, other people started to take that name very seriously. Steam and punk needed to become serious references to something bigger. Originally, in Jeter's mind, steam was a reference to the industrial age, just like cyber was a reference to the information age, or rather a future dominated by computers. But that was no longer enough. It needed to be more specific, so it became to mean whatever people projected on it. For example, everything needed to be steam-powered, and a punk all of a sudden needed to have some deeper meaning. And if the goals derived from that meaning weren't met, well, steampunk is dead, because reasons nobody really cares about but themselves. Good job. My point is that steampunk is just a name. Deconstructing it or trying to derive meaning from it has no practical value at this point in time. It means different things to different people, and all you're doing is possibly constricting a community, a aesthetic and a genre that is a niche in the first place. Steampunk became a subgenre of science fiction because it had a specific approach to writing alternate history. To create subgenres from a subgenre is just excessive. And that brings us to all the whatever punks. No, I don't want to repeat what I said in previous videos. Or like there are no rules on the creation of these labels or how superficial they actually are. Or that they don't represent anything new or different. Should Art Deco be considered dispunk, or should Art Nouveau be considered dead punk? A simple yes or no question, but what does the answer mean? The Chrysler Building is dispunk now? Or the Disney Palace is dead punk? Is it? If that is not what you mean when you ask that question, then why are these questions always phrased like that? Here's my point. Art Deco deserves to be its own thing. It's a term invented in the 60s to describe an existing collection of buildings with similar architectural style, and that style was also prevalent in science fiction of that era. It is almost like they were really obsessed with progress in that time period. It doesn't need another name, nor does it need to become part of some word you happen to identify with. The discussion is being held backward. As far as I can tell, people take whatever is their preferred punk and then start looking for stuff that they want to include in that. This becomes a problem when all these punks have very similar tastes. So, the dispunk will look at a random object he or she likes and say, hey, this is dispunk, and then the dead punk will show up and say, no, I like it too, therefore it is dead punk. And by the time they finish the argument, there are probably 5 different other punks invented to describe the same object. It's so ineffective it's hardly worth talking about really, and people will keep doing it no matter what I say. In that case, is there really any point to this video? Well, actually there is, but I already talked about it at the start. As a matter of fact, let's rewatch that part real quick, shall we?
These were basically science fiction stories set in a Victorian setting because that was the period of early science fiction these new tales drew their inspiration from.
When interviewing guests on our podcast, we talk about where artists get their ideas from. Now I often say that steampunk inspires us to take on creative responsibilities, like writing our stories or creating these episodes. In this case, steampunk has inspired our behavior, how we do things and what we do, organizing events, developing traditions. But steampunk, when I think about it, steampunk has very little to get intellectually inspired by. Let me explain. Coming back to the same statement again, steampunk borrows its ideas from contemporary and antiquated pop culture. For example, Marvel characters combined with science fiction from the 1900s. But people can develop those interests outside of the steampunk community, and many, like myself, have. The people attracted to that melange of old and new happen to be called steampunks, and those steampunks have developed a community that just happens to be the target audience of creators such as ourselves. If I haven't made it clear already, the aesthetics of steampunk aren't new. It didn't appear from inside a vacuum. It's a continuation of styles and stories and traditions that came before. There is an irony in that we need to look backwards before we can move forward. This way we can find out how we are different from the creators who preceded us and determine what areas we can improve in. That is what the creators in the scene are already kind of doing by incorporating modern pop culture tropes and other influences like superhero comics or specific artists like Tim Burton. The answer isn't to relabel these into their separate punks based on personal preferences. We need to talk more about these sources of inspiration, learn more from them, learn about the context in which they were created, and through that way learn more about ourselves. To conclude, I don't think inventing new labels has any merit. If we want to give a name to something, we need to define what that thing is and why it is new. And with new I mean so different from things that came before, it actually merits one. What makes steampunk different is that it combines archaic with contemporary pop culture. The artists who have created the steampunk aesthetic tend to draw their inspiration from various sources, aka things that have gone before. So if you want to understand your fellow steampunks and their creations, just start with the classics like Metropolis, The Strange Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Nosferatu. Visit old historical sites and museums. Read or listen to the stories of Lovecraft, Huxley or Wells, just to name a few. And that is why I believe we need to change the way we are having these conversations. And with that I'll conclude the seminar for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have questions or topics for future videos, let us know in the comments. And with that, I'm gonna bid you adieu, and as always, make things your way. Before I continue, let me thank our patrons, in particular Steamy Wonders and Bowlerhead Tom, for their continuous support of this channel. And with that being said, I am branching out and I have started a Fiverr account where you can hire me as a voice actor for your projects or commercials. I'm also considering taking on commissions for props or decor, like for example the brick wall panels that I've made a video on. Check the links down below for examples of my work. We also have our own steampunk short story series, the Association of Ishtar. We've got one of the stories as an audiobook here on the channel, so go check that out if you haven't already. With that being said, enjoy the summer. Bloody hell, it was uncomfortable recording in costume in this video.